Do you want to stay more focused on the right goals in your life, or even just figure out what the right goals are for you? Do you want clarity? Do you want better work-life balance? Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to Success Through Failure.
Welcome to the Success Through Failure podcast, the show that reveals failure as your path to success. You'll listen to intriguing interviews with some of the most successful people on the planet and learn how their failures became a launchpad for success and how yours can too. Here's your host, former Division I All-American wrestler, former Division I head coach, speaker, and personal coach, Jim Harshaw.
Welcome to another episode of Success Through Failure. Today I bring you Jay Nixon. Do you feel out of balance in your life, like your family and your work are your priorities, but you don't have enough time in the day, so you're shortchanging them both? Not to mention wanting to work out more or do more of the things that you love. Are you easily distracted and you want to be able to stay more focused so you can lock in on the most important things that you know you should be doing? You want to be more consistent so you can achieve those goals that always seem just out of reach. Or maybe you feel like you just lack the motivation that it takes to get there. Or maybe you're just not clear on what the right first step actually is. Like every time you're about to take action, you doubt whether or not it's the right action or the right goal. I know the feeling. I've got a wife and 4 kids. I have a job, a rental property, this podcast, not to mention the inevitable challenges that just come up with life, like, illness and struggling family members or car trouble. I've got a lot going on. But when I was a Division I All-American athlete, I was completely locked in. I was focused. I was balanced, and I knew exactly what I wanted and the steps that I had to take to get it. But when I got into the real world, things got a lot more complex. There's just a lot more time demands. Like everything seems to be a priority. How are you supposed to figure out what's the right next step for you? Well, I've developed a system that helps you do just that. Find the balance, the clarity, the focus that you're looking for so you can take your life to the next level. So you can start seeing the dreams that are in your mind as realistic goals and have a plan to achieve them. I've opened a few spots on my calendar for free 30-minute strategy calls so you can take that first step toward the life that you've always dreamed about. Just one simple step, one small commitment that will give you huge results, a simple phone call that will leave you with a plan. If you want this life, if you want to truly have a breakthrough, claim one of the few spots open on my calendar, and I'll share with you the formula that has had people who I work with saying things like one of my recent coaching clients, Frank, who said, "My only regret is that I didn't do this 20 years ago." Or like Isaac, who said, "I love this version of myself the best, and I'll do anything to keep it going." I've got dozens more quotes like that. If you want to feel the same way, go to jimharshawjr.com/apply. That's jimharshawjr.com/apply. Jay is a speaker, author, mentor, and coach whose mission is to help every person achieve their absolute best. He's the owner of the Thrive Fitness Studio in Palm Desert, California, and the leader of the Thrive Tribe, a collection of Jay's current and former clients who work together to improve their health, their fitness, and their lives. For over 2 decades, Jay has helped thousands of people achieve total body transformation through a combination of fitness, nutrition, and personal development coaching. Jay believes if you give people the right tools, education, and support, they can far surpass what they once thought was their maximum potential. Dubbed by CBS News as one of the best fitness and nutrition experts in the business, Jay has been featured on ABC and Fox and in Triathlete Magazine. Now, for the regular listeners, you already know this, but if you don't have time to listen to the entire episode, or if you hear something you like, make sure you grab your copy of the action plan. It's just kind of all the highlights. It's the cliff notes. It's the links. It's the action items from these episodes. Just go to jimharshawjr.com/action. That's jimharshawjr.com/action. Jay, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for having me, man. I'm excited.
Well, let's start with this, Jay. Tell us about your background. Tell us, where you grew up and a little bit about how you got from, to where you're at now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I grew up in Texas. I actually, I live in Palm Desert, California now, but I grew up in Texas, tiny little town, about 4,000 people called Cisco. If you know anything about Texas, it's I-20 kind of runs right through the middle of the state, and it's kind of, a little bit West Texas-ish. So, growing up in a town of 4,000 people, you never think that you're going to be, doing something like this, having a studio, writing a book, and all kind of things like that. But I just found that at every turn of my life, like I'm an athlete, played football in college, and always thought I would do something, medical, helping people, nutritional, something of that realm. And at every turn, like this fitness and nutrition just kept, putting its head back in my life. I got my training certification when I was like 19 years old. And then I just, kind of dabbled in it. But like I said, I've worked in the medical field. I've worked in the nutrition industry. I've consulted for the NFL alumni. So I've always been around sports and athletics. And finally, one day I'm like, listen, if it's going to keep poking its head, I'm just going to, let it in and we're going to see what we do with it. And it's been amazing. Like I get to work with so many beautiful people and help them change their lives. And I've had the opportunity, like I said, to write a book that's, hopefully going to change the lives of a bunch of people. So it's been an awesome journey, man.
So I want to talk about your book, but first I want to mention my first ever experience, actually my second, I guess, ever experience in Texas was I had a job right after college leading adventure camping tours. And you mentioned Interstate 20, which runs across the state. And I was driving this 15-passenger van across the state, and on I guess I don't even know if it was 20, but there was a 2-lane road. It was 1 lane going each direction. Yep. And when I went to pass a guy, he actually pulled over on the berm and slowed down and let me pass him. I'm like, man, this is crazy. Like most of every other state in America, the person kind of speeds up or kind of hugs the line, doesn't let you pass them. But that was that was my first driving experience in Texas.
And that happens everywhere. And normally he'll wave at you as you go by.
You're right, right. I mean? Yeah. And then, whereas in the Northeast, they flip you off when you're going by.
Oh, for sure. And so you get used to that. And that's where I grew up, where everybody pulls over, they wave at you. Every car that drives by, you kind of put a finger up and wave or whatever. Yeah. And then a funny quick story. So I moved to California 10 years ago, and my significant other, Lori, and I, we lived in LA at the time. We'd go to dinner, and I would literally hold the door open for 30 people, and nobody would say hello. Right. She would be at the table, already ordered our drinks and appetizers. I would show up. She'd be like, where were you? You were holding the door again? I'm like, yeah. She's like, anybody say thanks? I'm like, nope.
Whenever I do that and somebody walks by, and if they don't say thank you, I just say you're welcome. They kind of look at me like, well, I didn't say thank you. I'm like, well, yeah, I know.
I got so used to doing it. Now I just hold the door open. I don't even expect anything. I'm like, hey, I'm doing my part to make the world a better place. It's not my responsibility to be, I'm not responsible for them, but I'm not going to keep being me.
Yeah, you're not responsible for their gratitude. Yeah, good stuff. So let's talk about your book, Jay. The Overweight Mind. Tell us about that.
You know what? I wrote it, Jim, because I kept hearing the same thing over and over and over again. So I finally realized that everything that people were presented with in the, let's call it the nutrition and fitness world, and that's going to encompass the dirty D word of diet and everything, was all really mechanical in nature. And so what I mean by that is if you look at Weight Watchers or Jenny Craig or even bariatric surgery or any fad diet or weight loss was pretty much mechanical, right? It was take this, do this, and this will happen. This is your return. And every one of my clients was coming in saying, I've tried all of these things. And they would list everything I just mentioned plus 75 more. And they would always say, and I always gain the weight back. And so what I realized early on was that the formula was wrong. It's not mechanical. And if we only touch the mechanical aspect of it, and by mechanical, I mean the actual physical program, here's your Weight Watchers, this is what you do, but you don't change your mental or psychological or mindset around it, that you'll always go back to where you started mentally. And that's why everybody failed. Every time an obstacle would show up, they didn't change themselves psychologically or mindset wise. So they would always go back to the beginning of where they started, and they are who they are, right? And so that's all they know. So the book is about the way I teach weight loss and fitness and just being your best self. It's 80% psychology or mindset and 20% mechanical, because I find that if you get somebody to change their mindset and their psychology, whenever the roadblocks or obstacles, or let's just call it life, rears its head, you've got a better chance because now you've got the tools, because you're growing mentally and psychologically, and you won't fall back and you won't, gain the weight back. And that's why I've got so many clients that have lost over 100 pounds and 70 pounds, 80 pounds, and are keeping the weight off for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. You know what I mean? So it's just kind of my theory.
That's interesting. So I find that very relevant to a lot of other parts of life. And I'm just thinking back, Jay, when I was wrestling in college, I, I had spent, I'd done my 10,000 hours, and I still hadn't reached my goal of becoming a Division I All-American. And I remember the switch for me took place not when I learned a new move or mechanically learned how to do something different on the wrestling mat. It was a mental switch. And I once I finally flipped that switch mentally, it was, and this is a little bit different, it was I guess maybe not so much. It was letting go of the outcome and really focusing on the process and just enjoying the battle that takes place between two guys on a wrestling mat. Once I started enjoying that and letting go of the outcome, then I started having fun. I started enjoying it, and by the way, had the best season of my career. Was the last season of my career once I finally let go of that outcome. I mean, do you find that similarity at all with your clients?
I think you're 100% dead on. I don't think it's different at all. I always tell my clients that the prize is actually in the process. Like everybody gets so goal oriented when it comes to like weight loss and like a number on a scale or a pant size. And I always try to explain to them that who they become through the process is so much more valuable than the prize, because the prize will continue to move, right? I mean, for wrestling, right, there's the championship or the All-American or whatever. So there's actually a tangible. But if we're really talking about like fitness and nutrition, is there really a stopping point? Like, is there really a point where you're like, I'm at the best shape ever, and now I'm just going to stop doing all this and go backwards? Well, no, right? So the true prize is in the process of who you become. So I think you hit the nail on the head.
And it's interesting, you talk about, in sports, there's the championship, right? But what I've learned is when you let go of winning the championship and you just focus on mastering your craft, when you focus on mastering your craft, being the best that you can possibly be at that thing, then the championship isn't even really the end, and it's not the only thing, and I think that's such an important lesson to grasp. So in your book, Jay, can you give us a couple of examples or a couple of stories or a couple of things from your book so we can get more of an idea of how you make this mindset shift, and then maybe even, second part of this question being, how do you translate that from just health and fitness to your life, maybe relationships or building a business or whatever the case might be?
Yeah, I think you're going to dig this because you're an athlete. You have a lot of athletes, former athletes that listen to this. But kind of back to what we were just talking about, and this is even in the book, it's about the process being more important than the prize. So let's think about like every time, let's just use the Super Bowl, for example, right? So when Tom Brady's on there and he gets the microphone and they hand him the trophy, and I know you're a Pittsburgh dude, and I don't like the Patriots either. So, I'm a Cowboys.
Right.
I'm a Cowboys fan. So
there's a little history there.
Yeah, we can both, hurt over this. But if you think about whenever Tom or any quarterback gets the microphone at the end of the game, they get the MVP trophy and the confetti's everywhere, very rarely do they talk about the moment, but they always talk about the journey to get there. They always talk about how much adversity that they went through this year. And they'll give examples like, so-and-so got hurt and we went through this adversity. It's the same thing with the journey to being like physically fit, or even to flip it, like you said, business, relationships, everything. Like the journey, the adversity that you overcome is really what turns you into the person that you are at the end of it, right? Which is the real prize. So, and I talk about that all the time. And I think you're right. Like the 80% psychology, 20% mechanics, I think it falls into place for a lot of things. Like I'm an entrepreneur, business owner, the same thing. And I find that it even flows for me in my business. When I'm psychologically and mentally and everything, like running it all, in full steam, the mechanical stuff tends to take care of itself. But as soon as you start like self-doubt, negative self-talk, listening to other people's negative self-talk, the whole 9 yards, you'll find your psychology begins to crumble. And then what happens to your relationships, right? What happens to your business? What happens to all those things? So right. I think they're perfectly interwoven.
Yeah. So what do we do? How do you change that mindset in our life? Yeah. I mean, what are some of the things that you do with your clients that help change that mindset from just that outcome, from the prize to the process?
Yeah, I do a couple of things. So I believe, like I'm obsessed with like greatness and successfulness and people that have come before. I believe success leaves footprints. And so, I've studied and researched a ton of things, and I believe that we're defined kind of by our habits and our rituals. So the first thing that I try to get my clients to do, and something that I do every day is, well, first of all, everything I do every day, and you're going to probably laugh at this, as soon as my eyes open in the morning, I've trained myself to do two things. I say, holy shit, I'm alive, because I think that we take that for granted so often. And then I say the word thank you. And I've programmed myself to do that every day. And if you think about it, we should feel like that every day, shouldn't we? I mean, this is such a gift. And so many of us get up and just kind of like robotically go through the day. So I teach them to do those two things. And then I have what's called the Thrive 3 in my business, Thrive Fitness Studio. But every morning I write down 3 things that I'm thankful and I'm grateful for. I make my clients do the same thing. Every morning I give 3 hugs and 3 high fives, first 3 people I see, obviously not strangers because they'll freak out. They'll freak out if you hug them. And then I do 3 action steps for the day. Like, what are 3 things that I can move me forward toward my goals, right? And then I do 3 words of encouragement. So I'll send out like 3 text messages, 3 emails, 3 phone calls, 3 little mini conversations. And I think that just sets you up. Like those habits and rituals, when you start to do them every day, day in and day out, like they're almost foolproof. And what I've found is if you have that mindset of positivity, encouragement, thankfulness, and gratefulness, it is virtually impossible to be in a bad mood. It's virtually impossible to have a bad morning. So those are simple things that we can do on a daily basis. And then it just compounds from there.
That's interesting. So those are very small things that we're not going to necessarily do that and then make, $1,000 more that day or $1 million that year just because of that one time. But it's this repetition of doing the right things, right? These small habits.
Absolutely. And so what happens is, listen, if you can't do the small things in life, you'll never be able to do the big things. And so if you can't wake up every day and write down 3 things you're thankful and grateful for, the likelihood of you doing the big things that show up that require a lot more effort, a lot more desire, a lot more everything. I mean, really, if you think about it, your likelihood of doing those consistently is not going to be as great. So what I do is I believe that, again, I think we're defined by our rituals and habits. And so I always tell people this, and this is a kind of a horrible analogy, but if somebody wanted to assassinate me, it'd be very easily because I'm very ritualistic. I'm here at this time. I'm there at this time. I'm there at this time. And I have my schedule set up like that. And I believe in what I've studied and researched on some of the most successful people in the world. They're the same way. They really have habits and rituals that drive their day.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been noticed that with a lot of my guests that I have on the show. They have these habits, they have these rituals. And so how do we, talking to the audience now, the listeners, how can you teach them to decide which habits are the right habits? What's the right morning routine for me? You gave a couple of examples. You waking up, and as soon as you open your eyes, you have sort of a mantra that you say, and then
Right.
you have these gratitude exercises with the Thrive 3. What are some other sort of routines or habits that you've seen or learned or read about that the listener can take and maybe incorporate into their life?
I think one of the first things that you have to do, Jim, is you have to get clear. You have to get clarity around like what's the end goal? Like really what's a lot of people talk about like what's your why? And I'm really big on that. Like I think if you know your purpose and you know your why and you really know what you're moving toward in life, like that's the most important thing. Because if you don't know where you want to go, then you're going to have a really hard time setting up habits and rituals and an action plan that move you in that direction. So first and foremost, it's clarity around that. And I'm a big journal guy. Like I journal a ton. And so I'm constantly, like I said, I write down my action steps. I write down my mission, my why, and I get very clear on that. And so what I try to teach my clients to do is let's get clear on what's your why. Like why is this time going to be different? So why are you going to this time really make some really positive changes in your life instead of that yo-yo thing that you've done for the last 20, 30, 40 years? And once I get them to get clarity around that, it's a whole lot easier to keep them focused. And so for the listener, if you're somebody who knows where you want to go, like you know what the end result is, then that's the easiest thing for you to do is then to start to take actionable steps every day that move you in that direction. And on the flip side, here's how you know whether it's a positive or a negative ritual, or a questionable ritual, if you will, or a ritual habit, is if it doesn't, write this down, if it doesn't move you in the direction of your goal, then it's probably a negative habit, right? If you get up every morning, let's just say you want to lose weight, and you get up every morning and your morning ritual is to go to the kitchen and have a bowl of Frosted Flakes with milk and a cup of coffee with, cream and sugar and a side of fruit, and then you're going to have some donuts at the office. We can all agree, right? Probably not a healthy habit or ritual.
Right.
And so the easiest thing for you to do is, if you want to, and the only way to really make a switch is if you want to get rid of an old habit or old ritual, you have to replace it with a positive and productive habit or ritual.
So tell me about a time, shift gears here a little bit. Tell me about a time when you've experienced, Jay, some kind of failure, because we listen to guys like you on my podcast and we go, man, this guy is success. He's just oozing success. And I think you actually invented a new word there a few minutes ago. I think you said successfulness, right? The new word. So we're going to use that. I like that.
I'm notorious. I'll be doing a training call and I'll be like, is that even a word? I'll combine like 3 words and I'm like, listen, we're using it.
We're going to run with it. So, but it just kind of comes out of you. You have this passion and you have these habits and this routine, and you were a college athlete, and now you have this business, and you're on TV and ABC and Vox, etc. And so, how about a time? Can you share with us a time where you failed, where you faced that massive self-doubt that comes with adversity and struggle and failure? Because every listener has some kind of self-doubt within them right now that's holding them back, that's making them say, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not capable enough. Tell us about a time where you experienced that and how you dealt with it.
100%. And you know what? This goes back a long way for me, and it's a really personal thing, and I have no problem sharing it because I believe that it's the pivotal moment of why I am where I am today. And what you're talking about is, I call this our story, right? Like, a lot of us have these stories that we tell ourselves and we tell everybody else as to why we can't, be, do, or have, or all these things. For me, man, it goes back to my father was killed when I was 5 years old. And I remember for the longest time, and this goes even into probably my college years, I had this unbelievable limiting belief surrounding, it was surrounded abandonment, if you will. You know what I mean? Like the fear of loss, the fear of if I do this, and it was everything. It was people, it was success, it was money, it was relationships. It was like, if I get too close, this will happen, because this has happened to me before, right? It's got to be my story. And so I remember the only time as a kid ever feeling like I had any control over anything was during sports. It was when I put the helmet on that I didn't have to be the kid who had the story. And I think that's why I gravitated towards sports so deeply and so passionately, is it's really the only place where I ever felt like nothing was going to be taken away from me. You know what I mean? Like, I thought I had control, even though in sports you never have control. But psychologically, I believed that. And it wasn't up until probably my early 30s, late 20s, when I started to say, man, this is not a way to live. Like I said, I've always been a really big researcher and studier, but I never thought I could have the things the people that I read about had. And I decided one day, I was like, what got me out of that was exactly what I'm doing now. So the way I teach and the way I coach and the way I mentor isn't based off, a lot of the stuff is based on my life. It's based on me overcoming the adversity of having a limiting belief and believing that I didn't deserve things and that things were always going to be bad for me. And I was able to change my story at my late 20s and realized that was all BS, man, that I made that story up to protect myself when I was 5 years old. And now as a 30-year-old, that doesn't serve me. I'm not the same person. And so I guess the thing is, we're always capable of changing that story if we're willing to do the work. And so what I had to do, man, is I got into coaching. I found mentors, and I got into this self-work of kind of what I talked about earlier about the Thrive 3, believing, being thankful and grateful, like all these things made a drastic difference. And you said something earlier about, saying 3 things that you're grateful for is not going to make you $1,000,000. I agree that you're right, but I also believe that if you can't be grateful and thankful, you'll never make $1,000,000. You'll never help 1,000,000 people, and helping 1,000,000 people is one of my goals. And so I knew I had to get clear on that, man. And so it was just kind of it's kind of a long-winded story of like for failure or whatever, but I think that was probably my greatest failure, was me and my self-limiting belief.
Yeah. Wow. So do you mind if I ask how your father died?
A car wreck. He was killed in a car wreck. Yeah.
So, you face this devastating tragedy when you're young, and you built a story around that, and you changed that story and allowed yourself to the freedom to believe what you wanted to believe, and you changed that story, and that sounds like it changed everything for you.
I believe now, Jim, and this sounds like crazy to say, if you tell somebody your father was killed when you're 5, the first thing they say is what? Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, right. And this sounds crazy to say, but I don't have any of those feelings. Like, I don't believe that I would be the man that I am today, and I don't believe I would have the gifts and the ability to help as many people as I've helped if I hadn't have walked that journey, right? And that's not to say that my life wouldn't have been fantastic, but it wasn't, right? Like, and I always tell people this, like, bad things happen to really good people. And I think a lot of times as humans, something bad happens to us like that, and we go through this whole thing of like, well, I must have deserved this somehow. Like, I must have not be a good person for my father to be taken away from me when I was 5 years old. And that's the analogy or the metaphor, but everybody can plug something into that hole. And for me, it was that whole thing of like, just telling myself that story over, and I created it. You know what I mean? So if I created it, I had the ability to get rid of it. And that's really, was the pivoting moment for me. Some people don't, though. They go through their entire life telling themselves the same story they created when they were 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old.
Jay, we've learned a lot here. We've learned a lot about how to create success in our lives, how to overcome terrible adversity. How do we crystallize? Can you crystallize this into some action items? Something, that the listener can walk away with, some kind of action item or action items that they can do in the next, let's say, 24 to 48 hours to start moving towards a better life.
This is going to sound nutty, but I think you'll get the gist of it. And if you actually do the work on this for the next 24 to 48 hours, you're going to see how powerful this truly is. First and foremost, I would start to do some version of the Thrive 3 that I mentioned. Like, get super thankful and grateful every day when you wake up. Just say those words, and it'll change your psychology. But if you will start to pay attention to your vocabulary and the vocabulary of the people that you associate with, you hang around, I call it my circle of success. Listen to the words you're using and listen to the words they're using. Are the words positive? Are the words negative? Like, what's the connotation in the story that your group is building? What story are you building? What story are you telling every day? That's the quickest way to make a decision on, is the vocabulary I'm using positive or negative? And I can tell you this, if you have negative vocabulary, like if you're somebody who uses the words like, I can't do this, this always happens to me. If you get yourself involved in gossipy behavior and things of that nature, I can promise you everything else is going to be a struggle for you. But if you flip the script on that and you get super positive with your language and your words, everything changes. And that's super simplistic, and some people might think it's a little hokey, but I promise if you'll pay attention for the next 24 to 48 hours, you're going to be amazed at what you hear from yourself and from others.
Yeah, I think you're going to have a lot of people shaking their heads saying, yeah, that sounds right, because, we've talked about this before on the podcast, and sort of the small things, the positive self-talk, the gratitude, things like that can make you, 3% better or 5% better on any given day. But you compound that over time, and that's how good things happen. Or if you compound that negative self-talk over time every day, that's going to take you from where you could be and drop you down, a lot lower. It's going to set you back pretty far, just those little things. So it's great advice, great action items. Jay, what about a book? Do you have a favorite book or resource that you might recommend? Any favorite books you've read?
Gosh, I've got so many, man. That's that's like picking, I mean, I don't have kids, but I assume that'd be like picking your favorite child.
Yeah, I've got four of them. So
yeah. So, you know what, right now I'm fascinated with speakers and like, public speaking and getting messages across. I believe, that's kind of how I think people learn is from, I think the old antiquated model of like some of the way we're teaching in schools isn't as powerful as this, like listening to somebody give like a life story or things of that nature. So I'm really into the book Talk Like Ted right now. It kind of gives a description of how like some of the greatest speakers, from our time and from the TED series have like captivated audiences and things like that. And I think we can learn from even a book like this, even if you don't want to be a speaker, we all need to be persuasive, right? If you have kids, you need to be super persuasive, right? Families, everything, your job, your businesses. And this will just teach you that like how people learn, like people learn in stories. They don't really learn about like statistics and, slides and things of that nature. So I found it to be very, very fascinating. And I'm also reading another book called Stealing Fire, which I found is just pretty fascinating as well.
Cool. All right. For the listener, I will have links to both of those books in the action item, as well as the definition for successfulness. I will have that in the action item as well at JimHarshawJr.com. Jay, can you take a minute to promote yourself? How can the listener find you, follow you, etc.?
Absolutely. The coolest thing, guys, if you're into reading, you're into books, and you want to check out The Overweight Mind, it's just theoverweightmind.com. That'll take you. It'll show you every format possible. You can buy the paperback, all the downloads, all the digitals. And then if you want to follow me on any social media, I'm at Thrive Fitness Studio, and that's on my Instagram. That's my that's my Facebook. That's everything. And then you can go to NixonElite.com. So just Nixon, NixonElite.com, and you'll find my full website of everything I offer and everything I do.
Excellent. And again, for the listener, I'll have links to everything you just mentioned there at the on my action item or the action plan at JimHarshawJr.com/action. Jay, thank you for making time to come on the show.
Thank you, man. Super fun.
And for the listener, until next time, take the time to get clear on your goals and embrace failure as a stepping stone on your path to success. Don't forget what I talked about before the interview. If you want to find balance, clarity, and focus, take the next step and go to JimHarshawJr.com/apply. Space on my calendar is very limited, so claim your spot now. JimHarshawJr.com/apply.